Hi everyone, it's Wendy Trevathan here, host of Your Nurse Voice Matters, and I have the beautiful Kelly Zakharoff with me today. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Wendy. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I met Kelly a couple of years ago now when she was wanting to write her book, so it's an absolute pleasure to have her here on my podcast to talk about herself. But I know Kelly, but none of you know Kelly out there at all, so I'll just do a little bit of an introduction and then we'll get going with the podcast. So, Kelly is an Australian author, a podcaster, and an endorsed midwife with more than 25 years' experience walking along women and families through birth. Her career has spanned private practice, public hospitals, Indigenous health centres, and university lecturing, giving her rare, I can't say that word, panoramic view of midwifery in Australia. In 2024, Kelly published Midwife Crisis From Trust to Trauma, a raw and unflinching memoir that explores the invisible toll of midwifery, the vicarious trauma, professional bullying, and systemic failures that drive many midwives out of the profession. The book has sparked national conversations, resonating deeply with midwives, doulas, nurses, and caregivers who often feel unseen and unheard. Building on this momentum, she launched Midwife Crisis, the podcast, a space where midwives and workers share stories that are real, funny, heartbreaking, and inspiring. The podcast amplifies voices that too often go unheard and has grown into a community of connection and support. Kelly is also the creator of the Midwife Conversations Tour, a grassroots series of events across Australia where midwives and doulas gather to reflect, connect, and breathe a little easier. Through storytelling, journaling, and shared dialogue, these sessions create psychologically safe spaces for caregivers to process their experiences. Known for her honesty, humour, and warmth, Kelly continues to champion the well-being of midwives, advocating for systemic change while offering practical tools for resilience. Her work is dedicated to one mission, caring for the caregivers so that midwives can continue caring for women. That's a really inspirational bio. Kerry and I've seen firsthand over the last couple of years, the impact that you've made. So um,
Mm.
let's sort of take the time back to I've actually often had the guest podcast co-speakers talk a little bit about their nursing history, but I think what a really nice place to start with would be your beginning midwife. Like, did you do general training or did you do go straight into midwifery?
No, Wendy, I was one of the very first Bachelor of Midwifery students in Australia.
Hmm.
So between Victoria and Adelaide, they started the BMid or Bachelor of Midwifery back in 1999 was the first one that started up in Adelaide in South Australia. And then in the year 2000, there was a cohort that started at ACU and Victoria University here in Melbourne. And I was lucky enough to be selected. I applied. I just had our second son, so he was around about 7 months old. And I went for a walk one day to the Carlton Gardens and I wandered into the Careers Expo. And there, probably about third or fourth stall in, I came across the Bachelor of Midwifery. And they were looking for mature age students to apply to become midwives. And of course, as we all kind of knew before that, yes, you had to be a nurse before you were a midwife. So, and I had no, I guess, aspirations of ever being a nurse. It wasn't something that I ever really wanted to be. And for some reason, it was midwifery that kind of drew me. And it's funny, and I even write this in my book, but when I started writing the book, my mum actually said to me, by the way, your Barbie dolls were always pregnant. So clearly, as a young child, I was always meant to be a midwife. So, yeah, at 27 years old, I signed up and I was in that first cohort of the Victoria University group. So there was 52 of us that signed up and 25 of us actually graduated.
Mm.
It's a huge attrition rate back then. But yeah, so that's kind of how I started. I was always a midwife. I was never a nurse.
Mm. It's funny how things manifest in your life, isn't it? And it's
Mm.
really good at the age of 27 that you had children of your own. I often felt when I had my two children to be nursed by a midwife that had not had children, I thought was a bit, it felt uncomfortable for me. I wanted to be cared for somebody that had been through
You've
that
been,
experience themselves. Yeah, definitely. So
yeah.
let's take the audience on a little bit of a trip. What happened then in your career?
So what happened then? So interesting enough, so because we were the first cohort, of course, like anything, there was teething issues. So I guess one of the biggest issues that we came across was that we never had existed before. So the system, being the hospital system, hadn't ever seen this happen before. So we were midwives going into a hospital who'd never had any hospital experience. So none of us had ever been nurses before. So we'd never dressed a wound. We'd never cannulated anybody. We didn't really have any of those skills, although they taught us those skills in university. And of course, it was, this was the time of where nursing skills and obviously midwifery skills were taken into a classroom. They weren't taught like most of the nurses were in Australia, taught in the hospital. So it was outside, it was in universities. So it was a really tricky thing to navigate that through. You'd walk into the hospital for your practical placements, and it'd be lots of, well, what do you know? How do you know about caring for a patient? What do you know about blood pressure? What do you know about, a pregnancy? What do you know about, cesarean sections? What do you know about surgery? So we were met with a lot of resistance. And you know what? That was hard. And thank goodness that I was a mature age student and I'd had a life. I wasn't an 18-year-old coming straight out of university, out of school, sorry. So I guess I probably had a little life skills behind me, which kind of made a big difference. So I was able to probably navigate those things more so than maybe an 18-year-old was able to. Um, but yeah, so we were held up. So our course was designed to be a 3-year degree, and I guess it was fast tracked, and there was a lot in it. And we then had to, and we were the first, so lots of teething issues, and they couldn't decide whether we had to do 20 follow through women to follow through the pregnancies, and the experiences of those women that we then could see their whole process of pregnancy, labor and birth, and then postpartum. And then they made a decision it had to be 30. So we got to sort of the final semester, and many of us didn't have the numbers. We didn't have the numbers that the Nursing and Midwifery Board had approved the course for. So when we got to that point, we handed in all of our paperwork and we got these messages from the university and from the nursing board telling us that none of us had enough time. We weren't eligible for the actual to graduate because we didn't have enough practical experience. So it was very disheartening. It took a lot of us by surprise. And a lot of the midwives, the students had actually applied for graduate positions and received them. But the
Oh, wow.
nursing board was not going to give us certificates, give us registration. So we had to go back and do 6 months more of practical placement. Um, I myself had not applied for a graduate position. My family and I had made a decision to move away from Melbourne as soon as the course was finished. We wanted a bit of a sea change. So we made a decision to move up to the Sunshine Coast. And this is a whole nother story to my chapters, but we decided to open a restaurant on the Sunshine Coast. So
Wow.
I had a university degree that I didn't have a registration for. And my husband said, come on, let's do a sea change. Let's go and live in Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast and let's open up a restaurant. So, of course, as you do, you think that's a great idea. And so we did that. And in the meantime, I obviously went in and I worked in this restaurant that we were kind of, building. We were very successful at it. But something inside of me was lingering. And I'm like going, but I've just done this 3-year degree and I really want to be a midwife. So What do? I walk into the nearest private hospital in Nambour, and I walked into the reception and I said to the receptionist, "Are you guys hiring any midwives by any chance?" And she looked at me and she said, "Actually, you know what? We are." And I said, "Well, I've just graduated this degree, but I need 6 more months of practical work. Can I come and work here?" So I was so naive, Wendy. I was so naive. And they're like, "Yeah, sure, but how about we just hire you?" And I was like, You mean like paid?" And they're like, "Absolutely." And I'm like, "I don't really have a registration yet." And they're like, "We can work that out."
Mm.
So I walked into that hospital as a paid midwife, but not yet completely registered. So it was a little tricky. And I had to then change it. And again, this was the time where registrations were state-based as well. So, where you did your degree, you got your registration. So, I should have actually been registered in Victoria. But when we moved to Queensland, I had to then walk into the Nurses Board of Queensland and present my paperwork going, "Hey, could you register me in Queensland?" And Queensland had never heard of the Bachelor of Midwifery.
Mm.
So it was a complete balls up, but we got there in the end, and I did 6 months of paid work as a midwife in a beautiful hospital in Nambour, and I was very well supported. I actually was working with, ironically, a cohort of very experienced home birth midwives.
Mm.
So those midwives were actually kind of moonlighting as midwives in hospitals at the time, but they were also home birth midwives. So every now and again, I would toddle off and go and do a home birth with one of them, and I'd kind of have these incredible mentors. I also learned how to water birth from the minute I stepped into that hospital, because it was a hospital that water birthed babies, and it was a very much a secret society
Mm.
back then about water birthing. So, and mind you, this was a private hospital too, so they were all under the women were under the care of private obstetricians, and these private obstetricians were very happy with midwifery-led care. So most of the time the midwives are doing all of the work. So it was
Mm.
incredible. And I met some incredible midwives and I met some incredible doctors. And I'm still friends with many of them today. And one particular doctor that I have a very close relationship with is Dr. Kirsten Small. She's now sort of come out and done quite a lot of work on CTGs and, fetal monitoring. So her and I do a lot of talks now together, which is really lovely. We tend to be on the same conference sort of, gig, which is great. But yeah, so I kind of just landed on my feet, Wendy. It was a very strange thing. And I guess that's kind of where I got my heart for
Mm.
midwifery, because I saw real midwifery, I saw real care, and
Mm.
I wasn't really in the humdrum of a major metropolitan hospital. I was in a very small town, beautifully, cared for patients. The doctors were so woman-centered, and I guess that's where I got grounded as a midwife, and that has never left me. That's
Mm.
never left sort of my philosophy of midwifery is that the woman is at the center of this, and that's what I was taught.
Mm.
So once we did sort of 4 years in the Sunshine Coast, and we made a decision to pack up our restaurant, and we moved to Brisbane. We wanted our children to grow up in a bigger city. So we moved to Brisbane. I got a job at the Brisbane Women's Hospital in the birth centre there. Did some work in the birth centre there for a little while. I then moved on to becoming a midwife. I worked for SIDS and Kids. I worked for an Indigenous program. I worked for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Health Service, where I was the senior midwife in the team there, where we were implementing quite a number of projects. I was kind of working on a project where it was about working with teenage pregnancies. So I worked and I sort of did a lot of work with the Aboriginal healthcare workers as well. I was kind of teaching them, which was really, really great. And I really loved doing that. And I was out in the community, in the Indigenous communities. When I speak about the Indigenous communities, I'm talking about urban Indigenous communities of Brisbane. So,
Mm.
all around the big suburbs, the back suburbs of Brisbane. And I was driving vans and picking up women and babies and bringing them in and immunizing them, and working with the 14, 15, 16-year-olds who were pregnant, giving them lots of antenatal education, and supporting them. And then obviously doing the postnatal care for them as well. And then I moved on and I worked for a private obstetrician, incredible private obstetrician, where he supported me to get my Medicare eligibility. So this was in the 2010,
Mm.
when midwives were suddenly recognized, and we were able to actually become Medicare eligible. So again, I was in one of the first cohorts, and it was I guess, appointed with midwives from Queensland. So there was actually 9 of us from Brisbane at the time who went through the first group of midwives to get eligibility. But at the time, you had to have a doctor who backed you. And
Mm.
I was obviously very lucky. I was already working with this private obstetrician, and he was like, "Absolutely, go ahead. I'll sign anything you want." So I was so lucky to have him. And I still, thank my lucky stars for Dr. Armstrong. But he supported me, and I did all of his postnatal work, and met quite a number of his women during their pregnancies and supported them. So we had an incredible relationship. And then I moved out to private practice. So that's when, and with Dr. Armstrong's blessing, he was like, absolutely, go and start your own thing. More than happy to support you. So that's when I started a private midwifery practice from my lounge room. Yeah, much to my children's dismay, having lots of pregnant women and toddlers racing around our lounge room for many, many years. I actually kicked one of my sons out of the downstairs bedroom and made that bedroom an office. And so my children were growing up with, heavily pregnant women coming and going from the house all day long, and me skipping out in the middle of the night. So that's when I also started my home birth practice. Again,
Okay.
I was very well supported by some home birth midwives. So yes, that's when I started home birthing, and I guess I kind of found this incredible passion for home birthing, and it really kind of, again, like it was my grounding. It was where I felt like I fitted. I fitted so well in home birth.
Mm.
And then I did that for about 13 years. And yeah, I kind of moved in different phases after that. So after my home birth practice closed down, I went into working with some students. I did some student work. I worked at Canberra University. We made a big decision to move back to Canberra, which is our hometown. And yeah, so I supported my grandparents through their palliative care. And at the same time, I was teaching at the Canberra Uni. And then we did another 360, and we made a decision to come back to Melbourne, where our roots are and where we love and where really is our home. And our children had all grown up by that stage, and they decided to go to university in Melbourne. So we kind of followed them. And then I started working at a big major metropolitan hospital in Melbourne. And that was at the exact same time that the pandemic hit. So I worked in a metropolitan hospital 4 years solidly through that pandemic. So
Mm. Gosh,
yeah,
what a career. And like
I
I can
know.
see you had like two open doors put in front of you of opportunity there, like with when you walked into that private hospital, sorry, in Nambour, and also with that doctor to step out and do your own private practice and having that support. I mean, you
I
must
was
just
so
have
lucky.
the golden touch that in
Maybe.
the timeline of things that it comes along your way. That's beautiful.
I think it was, Wendy. It was just timing. It was perfect timing, I guess.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. So what's happened since COVID times? So I know that, and what prompted you to write your book, Midwife Crisis? Mm.
That's a huge question and a good one. But
Mm.
going back, I guess we have to rewind the tape a little bit. And during the process of my private practice, as a home birth midwife, we had a situation where we unfortunately lost a baby in a home birth. The baby, a very healthy pregnancy, a very healthy labor, and unfortunately, this baby did not survive the birth at home. So, and at a point of that labor, I knew that that baby was not going to survive. And so obviously I put everything in place to have the right people there. There was really no opportunity to transfer her at that time to hospital, because she was ready to have her baby. She was fully dilated and pushing. And so I called ambulances, and we had 9 ambulance officers in the house at the time. But there was really no way that this baby was going to survive. And we did everything that we possibly could to support her to live, but she just wasn't going to live. So in the days, weeks, and months after that devastating experience, I had to go through an investigation. So it was not the parents that reported me. They were incredibly supportive, and obviously it was very sad, and they were in grief as much as I was. And I stayed beside them. I actually looked after this couple for the complete 6 weeks post-birth, as I would for anybody else. But I also continued a relationship with them for nearly a year afterwards. And they would check in on me, and I would check in on them. I went to their baby's funeral, and I spent a lot of time with them. And about 3 months after the baby had died, I received a letter from AHPRA, the Australian Health Practitioners Board, saying that there would be an investigation into my practice as a home birth midwife because of the baby that had died. And in amongst that, they had also put some other reports that just appeared out of nowhere that I had never heard of. They'd attached two other investigations against me in that report. And luckily, at the time, I had an incredible lawyer, and obviously, it was very shocking. It's very shocking to receive an investigation that you have never been warned about, you don't know anything about. Um, but the hospital that I had transferred the baby to had reported me. And mind you, I was a credentialed, endorsed midwife at that hospital. So I knew a lot of the staff, and a lot of the staff knew of my home birth practice. They knew what a safe practitioner I was, and it was obviously an unfortunate event. But in this, I guess in this era, there's always has to be someone to blame. So yeah, so I kind of ended up with the investigation on my head. I spent the first 6 months of that investigation going backwards and forwards with lawyers and AHPRA, and it's very tedious, and it's very demanding on your time, and it takes a lot of effort. And thank goodness I was part of the union, so I actually didn't pay for any of that. Thank goodness, because I my at the end of it, my lawyer said, that would have cost you over $100,000 for that investigation. So, and thank goodness that I was in the union. But so the first round of final reports on the investigation basically was closed, and there was no case to answer, which was a huge relief. And then around about 3 months after that, it was picked up again. So I received I actually got a phone call this time from someone I'd never heard of, saying that we've reopened the case and we are going to continue the investigation. And of course, my lawyer was beside herself, and she said, you can't do that. But they made a decision that this was their choice. They'd had a whole change of team, of kind of, leadership as well. And it felt, from my point of view, it felt like, someone had just found a file and had decided that this wasn't good enough, and that they were going to burn this midwife at the stake, because it was a decent witch hunt at the time. So another 12 months of backwards and forwards. So it was all up, it was a 2-year investigation. And at that time, obviously I was worn out. I was very burnt out. I was walking on eggshells. So I was also still practicing. I'd not been suspended, but I just felt I couldn't be the midwife that I was before, because I was just walking on eggshells. I was very tender. My soul had been ripped out of me, because the things that you read about yourself in an investigation is very shocking. And one thing, Wendy, that was said about me was that I was a danger to the public. Now, that if you ever read that about yourself, you begin to believe it. And when you are faced with the non-emotional aspect of AHPRA, there is no emotion in AHPRA. And I get it, they have a job to do, and I get it, but when it comes to a human, there is no human in an investigation. So they will go for the throat, which is what they did for me. And it took a lot out of me. It really changed the way I saw myself and I saw my practice, what I was providing. And I second guessed everything. I second guessed every single decision I made. I second guessed every time I went to palpate a woman's belly, every time I went to do a blood pressure or read a blood result. I had to stop myself, and it didn't seem like second nature anymore. It felt like I was, again, I had to check every single thing. I had to double check, triple check, and have somebody else check it. And it got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live like that. I couldn't live waiting for the next phone call. I couldn't live waiting for the next email that might say, we're making a decision about you today. So I rang my lawyer one day and I said to her, how do we finish this? What do we do?
Mm.
And she said to me, okay, we have two choices. And the choices they're putting on the table, or the options they're putting on the table for you, are that you hand your registration in as a midwife and you never practice as a midwife again, or you take an undertaking. And that undertaking basically stated that I would choose, it wasn't really my choice, but that was the choice I was being given, that I would never practice as a home birth midwife again. I could still hold my registration as a midwife, but I couldn't work as a home birth private practicing midwife.
Mm.
I didn't have to hand anything in. I still kept endorsement, all those sorts of things. So after about, I don't know, 48 hours of debilitating pain and tears and lying on the floor of a shower, trying to wash it all away, I made that decision. So I took the undertaking. And yeah, so I made the decision. So I basically had to hand in and not that anyone hands you a piece of paper that says you can be a home birth midwife, but I basically handed that over and I made a really difficult decision. I closed up a practice that had 17 employees. I had to shut everything down. Yeah, and I felt like I disappointed a lot of people. And I had women who were ready for my care. So I had, because as you do as a midwife, especially in private practice, you're booking your year in advance.
Mm.
The pregnancy is 9 months, and we generally took on 4 or 5 women a month in my practice. So I had to let all of those women know. And these are some women that I had birthed before, that I had been their midwife once, and they were coming back for their second or their third babies with me. So yeah, so that was probably the hardest part, was to actually tell them that I can no longer. And I also I guess I had to tell them the story. So when we got through all of that, as I'm talking about my husband, my family, my team, when that kind of all ended, I kind of sat around and going, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any other skills. Like what can I do? Who am I? And I felt like I lost a lot of my identity through that. Because I'd been a midwife for 20, by that stage, I'd been a midwife for about 18 years. So this is when we moved back to Canberra. So we made the decision to move back to Canberra. I opened a shoe shop with my sister because shoes and clothes are another passion of mine. And she sort of said, well, why don't you come and do this with me? So we did that. So I spent probably, 6 to sort of 9 months helping her set up this shop. And we kind of played shop for a little while. But I missed it. There was something missing. There was something in my gut that was missing. And it's funny, I'd watch pregnant women and I'd look at babies and I'd just be like, something's not good with me. And so I applied for a job at the Canberra University. So I got a job there lecturing and doing what was called practice support midwife. So I would go in to the hospitals and I would work with the students and I would literally be in there. I'd be the midwife in the room with them and teaching them all the practical parts. And I loved it. It was amazing. So, but of course, another sort of, little, shackle, if I want to call it that, is I had to, every time I apply for a job, and even now, nearly 10 years later, I have to disclose that I have chosen to take the taking. And I also have to write a letter. I have to write a letter of compliance to AHPRA every 6 months. So on the 12th of June and the 21st of December every year, I have to write a letter to AHPRA And I have to tell them that I have not practiced as a home birth midwife
Mm,
and I've been a good girl. And that goes for the rest of my registration, Wendy.
mm,
That never leaves me, ever. Um, I can apply to have the restriction removed, but it's a big rigmarole to do that. And you know what? I'm not sure I would ever go back to home birth. I don't trust myself, even though I know that this had nothing to do with me
mm.
and it wasn't my fault. But I don't trust myself. I trust the women, but I don't necessarily trust me in that space anymore.
It's
So I
awful that,
guess your question,
sorry, I was just
go
going to
on.
say it's awful that you've had that experience and to be able to have something like that come into your practice where you're self-doubting everything, double checking everything, and that almost makes you feel paranoid. And this goes across all levels of nursing, really. When you've been challenged and challenged and challenged, and you feel that you
Yeah,
are doing the right thing and the right practice, but it's in the eyes of someone else or the perception
yeah.
of someone else that you're not doing the correct thing for some reason,
Mm.
it does zap your self-confidence.
Oh, totally. I seriously, I even today, I still have, regular kind of nightmares about it, and even going back into hospitals, and again in those 4 years that I spent in the Metropolitan Hospital in Melbourne, my confidence was shattered. I
Mm,
remember the unit manager saying to me one day, she said, "Kelly, you need to stop pressing the emergency buzzer." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, why?" And she's like, "Well, you can do this. Like, you know what you're doing." And I'm like, "Yeah, I get that, but what if something goes wrong? Like, I need support." And she's like, "Well, we don't have enough staff to keep supporting you." So I was like, "Oh, okay, sure. I'll just continue on down the path of being like, my heart racing every time, a CTG dipped." But yeah, it was my confidence was very much shattered into
mm.
tiny little pieces. And it took a long time to really build that confidence back up. And I'm not sure I ever really got it back. But your question, what led me to writing the book?
Yes,
All of that led me to
all of
writing the
that.
book.
It's a really big pivot
So
point,
all
isn't
of
it?
that.
My goodness.
Yeah, it
And
was a
of course,
huge pivot point.
yes, and I remember speaking to you initially before you were thinking about writing your book, and I do recall your story,
I was
but I don't
scared.
recall. Yes, and I remember you were actually really apprehensive about whether to put it into a book, whether to tell these stories, and I remember,
Yeah,
in the first few sessions that you had that you really needed that support to be able to give that story because I'm, reading your book and anyone that has written a book very similarly, what you're doing is open the door to other people that are going through this very experience so that you can instill hope into those people and the confidence and to set the story straight from your perception of telling your story.
yeah,
It's really
from my
important.
perception.
Yeah.
And that's also a really interesting point, Wendy. When I actually started writing, I realized I wasn't a bad midwife, that I was actually a really good midwife. And that I gave so much. And that was the other thing I learned about writing was that what burnout was. Funnily enough, I actually never really knew that I was burnt out until I started writing the book. And I was like, because I was researching burnout at the same time, and I'm like going, all of these things I've done, this is me. Everything that is on the list of burnout, or every psychologist I listen to, or every podcast I listen to, or every TED talk I listen to, and they're talking about moral injury, vicarious trauma, bullying, burnout. I was all of those things, but I didn't recognize any of it when I was in it. And I'm that person as well. Like when I work like I give my 100%. I would never switch off. I would answer phone calls about, again, as a nurse and as a midwife, particularly as a midwife on call and a private practicing midwife, to that, you are 24/7. You are with those women 24/7. And I
Mm.
would get text messages at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 3 o'clock in the morning about, an ache in a shoulder or a nosebleed or my eyes fluttering. Is that normal? Is there something wrong with me? So you would constantly answer those questions because there was no one else to do it. Like you were it. You were their primary caregiver as a private practicing midwife.
Mm.
So, and they trusted you so heavily. They invested in you so heavily. So you had to be there for them. And that's when I realized that that was contributing to burnout. Um, and so hence why I wrote the book. So I wrote stories of those things. And I guess the thing about my book is that my book isn't about the fairy lights and unicorns of birth. It's about the trauma that goes with the caregiver.
Yes.
And in birth, and as we all know, yes, there are some fairy lights and unicorn births, and I have been present at those unicorns and fairy lights birth, and I've loved them. But I've also been at a lot of really traumatic, tragic births, and not necessarily a loss of a baby every single time, but women being traumatized, women being violated, women being abused, women being, obstetrically, obstetric violence occurring that nobody really recognizes at the time. But then when you look back and you go, oh my goodness, this woman is reporting this thing to me, and what do I do with this?
Mm.
And I watched that happen. But as a practitioner, how do I fix that? Where do I report that? And there's really nowhere to report it because sometimes in big metropolitan hospitals, those things are covered up. And so when I started writing these stories, light bulbs were just going off, and I was realizing how much trauma I carried, as well as other midwives carry, which is on top of the trauma that the women carry.
Mm.
Um, there was the big birth trauma inquiry as I was writing this book, actually, the big birth trauma inquiry in New South Wales was happening. So I was following that religiously. And I was just like, I saw this every day, every day.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's why I wrote the book. And it's funny because a lot of people kind of say to me, "Oh, so I'm not a midwife and I've never had children. Should I read the book?" And I'm like, "You should absolutely read the book. You should absolutely read the book about,
So tell
you know,
tell us about, what are some of the the wisdom lines that's come through all of this for, those midwives that are listening in, if they're actually experiencing or going through something very similar, what would be some of the things that you'd like to say to them?
the first thing I would say, and this is what I've created called Midwife Conversation, is find support because the place where you work isn't going to provide it for you. So, as midwives, nurses, we do not get clinical supervision, and clinical supervision is such an imperative aspect of our careers. And it was something that, again, I never got, and I only started clinical supervision when I finished practicing. And I wish I had done it while I was practicing. So getting support is one of the biggest things that I am advocating for now.
Mm.
Find support, and if it's not provided to you in your hospital or your workplace, then seek it outside. Spend the money, put some of your, wages aside for those sorts of things. Find a great therapist, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like a psychologist. A psychotherapist is probably one of the better parts of psychotherapy work for people like us, for midwives and
Mm.
for nurses. And talk. Silence does you no good. Pretending this isn't hurting you, pretending this isn't, causing you pain, pretending that you're okay is not good. And ironically, today is Are You Okay Day. And that's one of the days that I hated the most in hospitals because it was never genuine.
Mm.
There was nobody ever really saying, Are you actually okay after that traumatic event that happened 2 weeks ago? I want to check in with you. None of that ever happens. It's like that traumatic event happened. Are you coming back to work tomorrow?
Mm. In the
Um,
next sentence, in the very next
in the
sentence,
very
yes.
next sentence, yes. Or you should have done something better, or you should have, you could have, you would, and not, are you okay?
Mm.
Is there something you want to talk about? So being silent, and that is something that I did. I just kind of kept shoving it down. I just kept shoving it down and going, it's just part of the job, it's part of the job, it's part of the job. Be better, be braver, be stronger, be more resilient.
Mm.
And that word resilient kills me now. Um, And I never want to see a resilient nurse or a resilient midwife. I, that for me is you are just suppressing, you are shoving things down, you are not talking about what you see or what you feel or what you hear or what's gone on. So that for me is the the best thing that I can ask of midwives and nurses is to talk, to
Mm.
find someone to talk to. And I guess that's what I've started. I've started to, put it out there that, and I have, and since the book came out and since the podcast, I get emails, text messages, phone calls. I just get midwives who literally send me a message saying, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"Absolutely, you can talk to me." And I've spent hours on the phone, all at my own cost, at my own time. I don't charge people to do that because it's what's interesting is they often say to me, "I've never spoken to anybody about this before. I've never spoken about how much that birth that I went to 2 weeks ago really hurt me. And I
Mm.
know that this woman is suffering, but I was witness to that. I was witness to, again, that massive postpartum hemorrhage or that baby that we had to resuscitate or that woman that we had to resuscitate. They don't get to talk about it
No,
because it's a
it's
bit
just
like, move on, it's part of the
yeah,
job.
yeah, that's right. Get on and be
Move on.
functional the next day with
Yeah.
repeated
Yeah.
events. Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you can't, and this is something that you hear often, if you can't hack it, you shouldn't be here.
Yes,
You
that's
shouldn't
right.
be in this
What you
system.
said earlier, it's part of the job.
It's
Yeah.
not.
Oh my goodness. So you
It's not
mentioned a few
anymore,
things.
Wendy.
No,
It's not. And
yes, it's interesting what you're doing now. You mentioned a few things there that you've got your own podcast, that you're creating this community. What are some of the other things, like you mentioned before we started, that you've got a few conferences and speaking opportunities that are coming
yeah.
up into the future? Where do you see yourself going?
Well, I guess that's exactly what I'd love to do. I want to be able to tell these stories. I really want to be able to get this out there. I want to talk about vicarious trauma. I want to talk about what midwives and nurses go through. I want to talk about the crisis that we're all experiencing. And I don't want to continue to see, our numbers of midwives and nurses diminishing because they're all leaving the job
Mm.
because they don't get any support and they've got nowhere to talk. So I, I guess I'd love to see some advocacy around that. And I go to conferences a lot, and I've recently just been at a conference, and you just don't hear about it. It's never talked about. It's not talked about that stuff goes on in the background and that we're actually humans, we're human beings, and there's so much research out there about the women and the patients and, all of the, evidence-based care. Where's the care for the caregivers? Because if there's no care for the caregivers, we can't care for the patients. Because if we're falling in a heap or we're burning out or we're getting, kidney issues or we're having cancers, I've met so many midwives who have cancer and it's killing me. It really is. And I think a lot of the reasons why these midwives and nurses are getting so sick is because they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and they
Mm.
keep suppressing all of this trauma. And trauma sits in our bodies and we can't move it if we don't talk about it.
Mm.
So yeah, so I have a few conferences. I was lucky enough to talk at the Australian College of Midwives South Australian conference back in June. I presented, and that was probably one of the first big conferences I'd ever stood on stage. And oh my God, I was so petrified, but
Mm.
I did it, and I felt amazing at the end, and I got lots of incredible feedback, which is great. So I talked a lot about, well, I called it MidWife Crisis, and I talked a lot about the vicarious trauma that we go through and the silence and being investigated. And I told my story because
Mm.
not many people, if they hadn't read my book, then they didn't really know my story. So yeah, so next year I've been invited to the Australian Doula Conference as well, which is really lovely. So I'm speaking at the Doula Conference in March. I've just been invited to speak at the Maternity Consumer Network in Brisbane, which is at the Royal Brisbane Hospital in March as well. So I'm speaking there. I'm actually in November this year, I'm speaking at the Home Birth Conference. And
Mm.
again, unusual for them to put a home birth, a and home birth midwife on their stage, but
Mm.
I believe that they're pretty excited about having me there, which is great. And then I have the Convergence of Rebellious Midwives, so run by Melanie Jackson. She runs a massive conference every year. She's done it for 2 years in a row, and I'll be speaking at her conference next year, which is great. So that's in August. So in
Lots of things
between,
lined up. Yep.
lots of stuff. Yeah, lots of
Yeah.
stuff. And doing my own midwife, what I've called midwife conversations. So I'm been traveling, promoting the book, obviously, and in that time, wherever I've been traveling, I've been putting it out there. So if midwives want to come and talk, and it started off with one midwife saying, "Hey, could you come and talk to our group of midwives?" And I was like, "Sure, I can do that." So it's just snowballed now. So I do these again, I do them for free. Obviously, people who want to buy my book can buy the book at the events, but it's open to nurses, midwives, doulas, birth workers, anyone who's kind of in that space.
Mm.
I don't do them in hospitals. I don't step into hospitals for various reasons because I don't think that people are comfortable talking about what goes on in their workplace in their workplace.
Mm.
So I often use other places to do them. But yeah, they've been really well received. I did one in the Sunshine Coast a couple of weeks ago, and we had 33 people turn up,
Mm.
which was incredible. And I'm heading off to Cairns. I've had a break from them for a little bit, but I'm doing Cairns. I'm doing a conference. Again, I'm at a wellness conference this weekend in Ipswich. And then I'm going to Cairns. So I've got around about 13 midwives in Cairns coming, which is great. So yeah, I'm making the effort to get around and talk. And when we do these, people talk, Wendy. They actually tell
Yes.
me. I've
You
heard
made
some.
you made an interesting point of taking the conversation away from the organisation that's, I'm going to say, suppressing you, creates the avenue for where you can actually speak freely. Yeah.
And they do. They
Yes.
speak so freely. It's incredible. And it's a safe, really safe space as well. And
Mm.
it's something when I started, this is very safe. This is very non-judgmental. And one of the other things that I often ask in these conversations is I ask, how many of you have actually been through a report? How many of you have actually received a notification from AHPRA? And I can tell you a
Mm.
good percentage of them have, and they've never told anybody.
Wow.
So we talk a lot about that, how to manage it, how to deal with it, the emotions that go with it, and dealing with it. And again, like I think I said it earlier, but the union. So, and this is one thing. And when I did some talks at some universities earlier this year as well, and I'm doing one in South Australia, I encourage people, no matter what stage of their career, is to jump on board with the union
Mm.
because honestly saved my backside time and time again, or else I'd be a very broke midwife. Actually,
Mm.
probably wouldn't be a midwife anymore. But yeah, it's a lot of money to go through an investigation, and the union is an incredible resource and supportive service. People
Nice.
kind of dish the union a lot, but I think they're great.
Yes, they've got a lot of things within your union fees that you pay that a lot of people don't
Yeah,
aren't aware of. So
they
tell
don't they don't realize.
Yeah, so tell me, like you've shared a lot of tips, like since we started the podcast, but is there one key thing, one key message, one key gold nugget that you'd like to share with our audience?
I think the golden nugget is get support. Be supported. Sometimes your family can't do that for you.
Mm.
And I think sometimes it's very difficult to have those conversations with family. A lot of them don't get it.
Mm.
And like me, my family was very proud of me. And I sometimes felt like I disappointed them and I let them down when these sorts of things happened. So I say, please go and get support, find your people, talk to somebody, and make sure that you aren't silent about what's hurting and what's painful. And it might just be an average day at work, but, and again, you might be going, but that's normal, but it's actually not normal. It's not normal to watch somebody die. It's
Mm.
actually not normal to have to resuscitate 2 or 3 babies in a shift. And that's hard for you to go home with. So talk to someone. And if your manager is not a safe space for you, which sometimes they aren't,
Mm.
then find some people that are safe for you,
Mm.
whether that be colleagues or other people in another in a completely different genre of healthcare for you if a nurse and a midwife can have that conversation and a mentor. Find a mentor. Wendy, I'm gonna stop. Hey, Darren, my husband is talking on the phone with his AirPods in.
Thanks, Kelly, for sharing all those tips around support network. I think that's a really important point
Yeah.
for the listeners out there. So, Kelly, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. What you shared with us today, I can see I was lucky to get an hour with you this
Oh.
afternoon. So, it's been a pleasure to have you here, Kelly. Yeah. So, any last words?
I just want to thank you, Wendy.
Uh,
Honestly, I don't think this book would have actually got off the ground without you. And I was thinking about you today, thinking, I don't it's such a weird serendipitous moment that you were the person that picked up the phone that day. And I know I was probably a complete mess, and it would have been, very difficult for you to understand anything I was trying to tell you. But because I could never, at that point, I couldn't tell my story without bursting into tears. But writing the book has been really cathartic for me, which has been amazing. So thank you. That's what I want to say. And it's an incredible thing that you're doing with your podcast. And I know the time and the effort that goes into that, and how incredible it is that you're actually caring for the caregivers too.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate those words. And
Pleasure.
I don't remember you being a blubbering mess, but I do remember you had a really important story to tell that I could feel it. It transposed through the Zoom when I was talking to you. And of course, Nat and Stu have met you in person now, and hopefully we will be in the same city when we have a seminar, so we can do some
Yeah,
work together as well. Really nice.
love to.
Yeah,
Love to.
awesome. So,
Thank
thank you everyone for listening to us today, or if you're watching the YouTube, thank you for joining us. And this is the end of another episode of Your Nurse Voice Matters. If you know a nurse, or if you are indeed a nurse that has a story to tell, feel free to reach back to me, and I'd love to have you on my podcast and at a future date. Well, bye for now.